Okay, stop scrolling. It's 2 in the morning. You're walking to the kitchen for water, barefoot, half asleep, the floor cold under your heels, and then your foot comes down on something. Something thin, something curved, something that was not there yesterday. And before you have thought a single word, you are airborne, heart slamming, arms out, making a noise you did not authorize. It's a phone charger. It's always a phone charger. Now take that same dark, that same barefoot, that same half-asleep walk, and move it 40,000 years back, onto a cave floor, or a grass bed, or a riverbank at night. Same shape, same jump. Except this time, the shape moves. And here's the question almost nobody actually asks. What happened next? There was no antivenom, no hospital, no ambulance. And yet people survived. Not a lucky handful, a lot of them. So how? That's what we're doing today, and I want to be honest with you up front, because the answer is not the one you're expecting. It is not a secret herb, it is not a lost recipe, it is not some rugged ancestral immunity that we softened out of by inventing sofas. The real answer is stranger and quieter, and I think a lot more flattering to you personally. Because 4 separate things had to line up for an ancient human to walk away from a snakebite, and you are still carrying every single one of them around right now. One of them fires in your body about twice a year, usually over a garden hose. Let's go. First, the stakes. Because I think we have collectively decided snakes are a solved problem, and they are extremely not. The World Health Organization estimates around 5.4 million snakebites happen every year, right now, in the modern world, with hospitals and helicopters and antivenom in refrigerators. Of those, roughly 1.8 to 2.7 million are actual envenomings, meaning venom went in, and somewhere between 81,000 and 138,000 people die from it annually. Around 3 times that many survive with amputations or permanent disability. A separate estimate from the Global Burden of Disease Project puts the death toll closer to 63,000, which tells you something important right away. And I'll come back to it, because the fact that our best modern numbers disagree by a factor of 2 is itself part of this story. Read that again though. 80,000 people. This year. With modern medicine. Now delete the medicine. Delete the roads. Delete shoes. Put everyone barefoot in tall grass at dusk. For 200,000 years. Harvesting, foraging, sleeping on the ground, reaching blind into rock crevices and hollow logs and thatch. Modern data backs up exactly where this goes wrong. The majority of bites land on the lower limb, and the people getting bitten are overwhelmingly rural and outdoors and working with their hands. That was not a demographic in the Paleolithic. That was everybody. So the snake problem was not a rare freak accident. It was ambient. It was a background tax on being alive, and a species does not walk through 200,000 years of an ambient lethal tax without developing something. We did develop something. 4 somethings. And the first one is not in your medicine cabinet. It's behind your eyes. Here's a thing that happened to a scientist in Kenya in 1992. Lynn Isbell, an anthropologist and behavioral ecologist, was moving through a glade when she stopped. Just stopped. Froze, mid-stride, for no reason she could name. And then, a beat later, her conscious brain caught up and delivered the file. Cobra. She had already stopped before she knew what she was stopping for. Her body had made an executive decision and CC'd her afterward. Most people would tell that story at a dinner party and move on. Isbell spent years on it, and out of it came something called the snake detection theory, which is one of those ideas that sounds unhinged for about 10 seconds and then becomes very difficult to put down. The claim is this: primates, the whole order, us included, did not get our extraordinary vision because of fruit or branches or hand-eye coordination. We got it, at least in part, because of snakes. Snakes were the first serious predator of early primates. They arrived before the big cats, before the eagles. And unlike almost every other animal facing that pressure, primates did not evolve a chemical answer. We evolved an optical one. Other mammals that shared the burrow with snakes went the resistance route. Mongooses, hedgehogs, opossums, some ground squirrels, all of them carrying real molecular defenses against venom. Primates went a different way. We built better eyes and a brain wired to use them fast. You'd think that would be impossible to test. It isn't. In 2013, Isbell teamed up with neuroscientists in Japan and Brazil and went looking for the hardware. They put electrodes into a region of the macaque brain called the pulvinar, part of the thalamus, a structure that is unusually large in primates and involved in yanking your attention onto something relevant before you have decided to look at it. Then they showed the monkeys pictures. Snakes, monkey faces, monkey hands, plain geometric shapes. The snakes won. Not narrowly. Pulvinar neurons fired faster and harder to snake images than to any other category, including the faces of their own species, which for a social primate is an absolutely wild result. Faces are the most important thing in a monkey's world. Snakes beat faces, and here's the part that should genuinely give you a small chill. These macaques were captive-born. They had never seen a snake, not once, not in a field, not in a tree, not through glass. There was no learning to unpack, no bad experience in the file, no cultural transmission. The recognition was already installed. A later study found the same pattern further up in the prefrontal cortex, where those neurons responded faster to snakes than to carnivores and raptors, the other two great primate predators. And in humans, children with no snake experience spot a snake in a striking posture faster than a snake that is just lying there coiled, which means the system is not just detecting snake, it is grading threat. I want to be careful here, because this is a real scientific debate, and I am not going to pretend it's settled. The snake detection theory is contested. Plenty of researchers think the visual evidence is real, but the evolutionary story around it is too tidy, and that snakes were one pressure among several, rather than the origin story of primate vision. That criticism is fair. What is not really in dispute is the narrower, weirder finding. Primate brains, including yours, run a fast, low-resolution, pre-conscious channel that treats a particular curved shape as an emergency. Which brings us back to your hallway, and your phone charger, and the noise you made. That was not clumsiness. That was a 200-million-year-old subroutine executing correctly on bad input. Your ancestors' first defense against snakebite was never a cure. It was not getting bitten. It was seeing the thing at 11 meters instead of 1, and it was the freeze that happened before the thought. Every time you jump at a coiled garden hose, you are watching a survival system pass its self-test. And detection scaled, because the other thing primates do with a snake, once they've spotted it, is announce it. Vervet monkeys famously run 3 different alarm calls for 3 different predators. One for leopards, one for eagles, one for snakes. Different call, different response. The snake call makes the group stand up on 2 legs and scan the ground. That's a shared threat map, running on audio, in a species with no words. Humans took that instinct and industrialized it. Cleared ground around a camp. Fire kept going through the night. Sleeping up off the floor, wherever that was possible. Walking a path with a stick, putting noise out ahead of you, because a snake would overwhelmingly rather leave than fight something that size, and eventually, something wrapped around the foot. None of that is medicine. All of it is bite prevention, and prevention is the only treatment you get to apply to 100 people at once. But detection isn't perfect. Ambient risk means eventually, statistically, someone gets bitten. So what happens then? This is where it gets genuinely strange, because the second defense doesn't belong to you at all. It belongs to the snake. Venom is expensive. Not expensive like a nice dinner. Expensive like a mortgage. It's a complex cocktail of proteins and enzymes that a snake has to synthesize with its own metabolism, store in a gland, and then regenerate over days or weeks after it's gone. For an animal that might eat a handful of times a month, that is an enormous slice of its energy budget sitting in its head. Venom is not a weapon a snake fires freely. It's a savings account, and snakes appear to manage it accordingly. There's a well-documented behavior called venom metering, where a snake adjusts how much venom it delivers depending on the situation, injecting more into large prey and less into small prey. The logic is brutally simple. Venom exists to catch dinner. You are not dinner. You are a giant, warm, expensive problem that just stepped on its face, which produces one of the strangest statistics in medicine, the dry bite. A dry bite is exactly what it sounds like. A venomous snake bites you, the fangs go in, and no venom comes out. You get 2 puncture wounds, some pain, some swelling, an infection risk, and a story. What you do not get is envenomed. Now the number here gets quoted a lot, and it gets quoted badly, so let's do this properly. You will hear half of all snake bites are dry, thrown around as a clean fact. It is not a clean fact. Dry bite rates swing enormously by species and by circumstance. Australian eastern brown snakes have been reported to deliver dry bites in the region of 80% of human encounters. Taipans, around 5%. In North America, roughly 20 to 25% of pit viper bites come out dry, while coral snake bites run closer to half. Some emergency medicine sources put the overall figure near 10%, precisely because they'd rather clinicians assume the worst. So no, I'm not going to hand you one tidy percentage, because one does not exist, but the shape of it holds, and the shape is the point. A meaningful fraction of bites from venomous snakes, sometimes a small fraction, sometimes a very large one, deliver little or no venom at all. And every one of those is a person who lived. Sit with what that means for the ancient world. There was no way to tell the difference. A dry bite and a lethal envenoming start identically. 2 marks. A rush of adrenaline, a group of terrified people. Which means every time someone got bitten and lived, whatever they happened to have done in the previous 3 hours got promoted to a cure. The poultice worked. The chant worked. The stone worked. The man who sucked the wound worked. None of them worked. The snake had simply decided you weren't worth the deposit. That is the engine that built almost every traditional snakebite remedy in human history, and we will come back to it because it gets worse and much more interesting. But there's a third factor, and it might be the one that actually mattered most. Venom is slow. This is where movies have wrecked everyone's intuition. On screen, a bite is a death sentence with a countdown timer measured in minutes, delivered by someone gasping meaningfully. In reality, that is almost never how snakebite envenoming kills. Neurotoxic venoms take hours to shut down the muscles you breathe with. Hemotoxic venoms take hours to days to wreck your clotting or your kidneys. Even today, antivenom is most effective within the first 6 hours or so, but it can still help a day later, and in some cases longer than that. 6 hours, a day, longer. Stop and rotate that, because it changes everything about the question we started with. A snakebite in the ancient world was not an execution, it was a clock. And a clock is a completely different kind of problem. An execution is something you die from. A clock is something you can be carried through. And that's the door into the fourth thing. The one you cannot buy, cannot brew, and cannot evolve on your own. Here is what a serious envenoming actually asks of a human being, hour by hour. You need to stop moving, because muscular activity speeds venom through the lymphatic system, and the single most useful thing a bitten person can do is become boring. You need water, in small amounts, repeatedly. You need to be kept warm, because shock drops your core temperature. You need someone to keep the limbs still, and below the heart. If the venom is neurotoxic and your eyelids start to droop and your jaw goes slack, you need someone physically holding your airway open and, in the worst cases, breathing for you, for hours. And through all of it, you need to be somewhere a leopard cannot reach you, while being, for a day or two, the least defensible object on the savannah. Every single item on that list is another person. There is no version of this where you save yourself. A bitten human alone is a bitten human who dies. Not from the venom necessarily, but from immobility, exposure, thirst, and predation. In whatever order gets there first. Which means the ancient survival technology for snakebite was never pharmaceutical. It was social. It was a rota. It was 4 people agreeing, without discussing it, to spend the next 3 days doing nothing except keeping one person alive who was contributing precisely nothing to the group. And we can actually see that in the ground. There's a field called the bioarchaeology of care, developed by the researcher Lorna Tilley, and its whole premise is that a skeleton can record not just an injury, but the aftermath of an injury. If you find a healed catastrophic fracture, you have not found a tough guy. You have found a support network, because the healing itself is the evidence. Somebody fed that person during the months they could not feed themselves. The example that flattens people is a burial from Man Bach in northern Vietnam, roughly 4,000 years old. A young man, paralyzed from the waist down and with almost no use of his arms, from a congenital condition, he could not have fed himself, cleaned himself, or moved himself. He lived in that state for around a decade. That is not a miracle of medicine. There was no medicine. That is 10 years of someone showing up every single day. There are older, more argued over cases too. Shanidar 1, a Neanderthal man from Iraq with a withered arm, likely blind in one eye, and, based on later analysis of his ear canals, probably deaf, who lived for years with all of it. That one is genuinely contested, and I'll say so plainly rather than sell it to you. Researchers disagree about how much care he strictly required, but the pattern across the record is not really in doubt. Humans have been surviving things they should not have survived for a very long time because other humans absorbed the cost. So when you ask how ancient humans survived snakebites, the honest answer is that they were carried. Literally. Somebody picked them up. And now let's talk about the part everyone actually wants to hear about, which is the cures. Because this is where everything you think you know gets quietly dismantled. The popular picture is that ancient people had a deep pharmacological wisdom about venom that we've lost, and that somewhere out there is a plant that fixes a cobra bite. Here's the reality. Almost every historical snakebite treatment was useless, and a decent number of them were actively lethal. Cutting the wound open and sucking it does not remove meaningful venom, does introduce infection, does destroy tissue. Tight tourniquets concentrate necrotic venom in a limb until the limb dies, and then, sometimes, release a bolus of it all at once when loosened. Cauterizing the bite with a hot coal, a burn, on top of a bite, on a person in shock. Every one of these persisted for thousands of years across unrelated cultures, and every one persisted for the same reason we covered earlier. Dry bites. If a quarter of your patients were never envenomed, your useless treatment has a 25% success rate, and 25% is more than enough to build a profession on. There were famous specialists too. The Sili, a people of ancient North Africa, were reported by Greek and Roman writers to be immune to venom and to be able to cure the bitten. They were, essentially, celebrity snake doctors of the classical world, and the evidence for the immunity is some very good storytellers said so. That's it. There's no reason to believe any human population has ever carried real genetic resistance to snake venom. Mongooses have it, through mutated receptors that neurotoxins can't grab onto. Opossums have it. Hedgehogs have it. We do not. We got the eyes instead. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that ancient people were simply wrong about all of it, because the single best surviving document on this subject is startlingly clear-headed. It's called the Brooklyn Papyrus, from Egypt, written in the 7th to 4th centuries before the Common Era, and it is the oldest known structured treatise on snakebite anywhere. It was the working handbook of the priests of Serket, the scorpion goddess, who functioned as the emergency responders for venom in Egyptian society. And what's in it is not a magic cure, it's a field guide. The first section works through snake after snake, 38 of them by the papyrus's own count, though only 24 of those descriptions survive today. For each one, what it looks like, sometimes how it behaves, what the bite looks like, what happens to the victim, and then, crucially, a verdict. Some entries read, in effect, this person can be saved. Others read, this one dies quickly. That's triage, written down 3,000 years ago. They could not cure envenoming, and I don't think they believed they could. What they could do was identify the animal from the patient's description, predict the trajectory, and allocate their extremely limited effort toward the people who might actually live. The second half of the papyrus has around 140 treatments in it, a blend of herbal preparations, poultices, basic wound handling, and spoken incantations. And yes, one of the recurring ingredients is onion. The pharmacology is not the achievement. The classification is. So when does it change? When does a human being finally get something that actually neutralizes venom in the body? There's a date. February the 10th, 1894. On that day, in Paris, the French Society of Biology heard from two separate research groups who had, independently and essentially simultaneously, cracked the same problem. From the National Museum of Natural History, Césaire Fissalix and Gabriel Bertrand. From the Pasteur Institute, Albert Calmette. Same principle, arrived at from opposite directions. Take venom, weaken it, inject it into an animal in escalating doses, and harvest the animal's blood serum, which now carries antibodies that can neutralize that venom in someone else. Calmette went on to manufacture Cobra antivenom at scale in Lille, and largely got the credit, which Physalix largely did not, which is its own small tragedy. That's it. That's the line. Everything before the 10th of February, 1894, on both sides of every ocean, for the entire 200,000-year run of anatomically modern humans, was detection, luck, time, and other people. Everything after it has a molecule in it, and here's the last layer, the one I saved for the end, because it's the part that quietly reframes all of this. Remember the two numbers I gave you at the start that didn't match? 81 to 138,000 deaths, versus about 63,000. Why the gap? Because snakebite is still, right now, largely invisible to the systems that count deaths. In Nepal in the year 2000, the health ministry recorded 480 bites and 22 deaths for the entire country. A community-based study in one region alone, that same year, found 4,078 bites and 396 deaths. In one district of Sri Lanka, a comparison against the Registrar General's records showed that over 60% of snakebite deaths never appeared in hospital data at all. India's own official figures have been off by more than an order of magnitude against direct community surveys. Those people are not dying in emergency rooms. They are dying the old way. At home, in a village, hours from a road, surrounded by family who are doing exactly what your ancestors did, keeping them still, keeping them warm, keeping watch. The ancient scenario didn't end. We just stopped counting it. So let's bring all of this together, because there were 4 filters between a bitten human and a grave, and not one of them was a cure. The first filter was your eyes, and a brain that flags a curved shape as an emergency before you consciously see it, which is why most bites never happened at all. The second filter was the snake's own economics. Venom costs it too much to spend on something it cannot eat, so a real share of bites came out dry, and the person walked away believing in whatever they'd been given. The third filter was time, because venom is slow, and slow turns a death into a deadline. And the fourth filter, the one that did the actual work, was other people. A group willing to stop, carry, sit, guard, and wait out a clock on behalf of someone who could not do a single thing for them in return. Take any one of those away, and this video is about a species that got wiped out by grass. Together, they were enough. Not enough for everyone, not close to enough for everyone, but enough. And I think there's something in the shape of that answer worth taking with you. We tend to imagine ancestral toughness as an individual property. The lone survivor, the hard man, the person who could tough out a cobra bite because life back then made you harder. It's a flattering picture, and it is simply not what happened. The hardness was never in the individual. It was distributed. It lived in the space between people, in the boring, unglamorous, entirely unrecorded decision to stay with someone through the second night, when nothing was improving and there was nothing left to try. That is the technology. That was always the technology. Which brings us back to your hallway. 2 in the morning, bare feet, cold floor, and your foot leaves the ground before you know why, and your heart is going, and you're standing there furious at a phone charger, feeling like an idiot. You are not an idiot. You just watched a system fire that has been running, continuously, since before your species had a name. Somewhere back down your line, that exact reflex fired on something real, and it fired in time, and that is a meaningful part of why you exist. And on the days it didn't fire in time, somebody sat down next to the person it failed, and stayed. You're descended from both of them, the one who saw it and the one who stayed. Try being embarrassed about the garden hose now.